So that's pretty much it for Georgia, Kentucky, which leads us into our game of the week. Alabama LSU obviously is a huge game every year. Even when one of these teams is down, the other one isn't. It's still a big, monumental clash. CBS did Alabama no favors by picking this to be the doubleheader week, even though the undercard is Florida at an unranked Arkansas, and moving this into a night game in Death Valley. Alabama historically has done pretty well there, but I don't think any of that matters for this weekend. There's some matchup issues that you've got to be worried about if you're an Alabama fan. Jalen Hurts really struggling to throw the ball in the last game, and it's kind of shown up all year. Lane Kiffin's being able to protect him a little bit, but now we've got a defense that can line up hat on hat, stop the run game, and force you to throw. So I know we're going to get into the model in a second, but before we do that, I'd like for you to talk about what LSU is going to do, and is Alabama equipped in the passing game to take advantage of what they're going to be forced to do?
Right. This is the big question, and it's something we've kind of harped on for a while, and we weren't really able to see how it would play out, but LSU has a decent enough pass rush. Arden Key is pretty good. I personally don't think that Arden Key is quite as good as he's cracked up to be. What they do have is they have really good sideline to sideline talent. They've got a lot of big bodies in the defensive line. They got big guys at linebacker. So they can sort of sit there, stuff the run, play man defense with what are a very good set of defensive backs, and then, again, and just kind of strangle you. It's again, a lot defensively. It's a lot like Alabama, but it's like an older Alabama team, oddly. Jamal Adams is a big physical safety. They really don't probably have some of the same ball hawking disruptive cover skills that Alabama has defensively this year. And they're not as athletic. Probably they aren't nearly as athletic in the front seven, but they're big. And, so what they're going to do is they're going to force you to throw the ball. They're not going to let you try to run it easy. And they're going to kind of drop back in coverage, not necessarily bend, but don't break, because Aranda is a very aggressive defensive coordinator and will blitz a lot. But they're going to try to really wait for you to make a mistake and burn yourself out.
So if we know that they have the potential to stop the running game for Alabama, which I'm not sure that's a given. I'm not sure that any defense, even the best defenses, are going to fully shut that down. But let's say they have a less than average night with the run game. Have we seen enough from Jalen Hurts to know whether or not he's going to be able to at least function adequately enough to get a win in that scenario, or do we still not know?
My gut instinct right now is if Jalen Hurts has to pass to win the game, Alabama's in a lot of trouble. I have not seen the sort of production from Jalen Hurts in the intermediate to deep passing game that one wants to see. He's had some good games. I know he's a statistically very good passer. He has high QB ratings, but several times this season he's really shut down on yards per attempt. I mean, half his games have been below 7 yards per attempt, right? Ole Miss, he only had 5.1 yards per attempt in that Ole Miss game. I've seen some arguments from people that, like, well, Alabama, Hurts really won him the game, and his run stats really helped them. But the passing game against Ole Miss by Alabama was pretty terrible. Not awful, but 104 QB rating. They really could not move the ball through the air with any consistency in that ball game. They were forced to run it to win. And you can sort of look back on that and realize that Kiffin probably should have ran the ball more in the Ole Miss game. We now see the Ole Miss's run defense is really spotty, and Alabama took it over when they ran it, and they probably should have run it more early in that ball game. But Kent State, Tennessee, Texas A&M, he failed to hit 7 yards per attempt in all those games. The one game that he really went off was Arkansas, and he went off in the Southern Cal game, but he only threw 11 attempts in that ball game. They had 2 touchdowns on these long completions to wide open receivers, but Uh, Most of that game, he was throwing bubble screens for minimal yardage, and beyond that, we just haven't seen a sophisticated passing game from either team. So, yeah, I will be very, very curious to see how they do coming out of the bye week. I know that developing a deep and intermediate passing game had to be a point of emphasis for the Alabama coaching staff because they don't have it right now. I know in the Texas A&M game, he threw 25 passes and he completed 15, but only one of those passes went 10 yards downfield. 20 of the 25 attempts and the 15 completions, 14 of the 15 completions were completed within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. And that's just not going to cut it against the really, really good teams in the schedule like LSU that are going to be able to slow down that run game enough that they're going to have some semblance of balance.
And, I think everybody thinks about in this coming in this game, and I even started with it, which is because it's on our mind. Can Alabama throw to win the game if they have to? Because in your mind you think, okay, Alabama's got a good run defense or run offense, and has some issues at quarterback but can throw it, and then LSU has this dominant run game that is to be feared, and you're not going to shut them down regardless. So they don't have to have everything, a whole lot at quarterback. But who is leading the SEC in rushing right now? It's Damian Harris. Who is fifth in the SEC in rushing right now in per carry average? It's Josh Jacobs. So Alabama has, in my opinion, just as devastating a run game. They just don't have that star power name at the top in Leonard Fournette. And we've been on Damian Harris all year long, and we're going to stay on it because the guy, you don't have an 8-yard per carry average in the SEC going into week 10 if you're not a badass. So Damian Harris, you're officially a badass because we said so. So having said all that, the flip side is if you are looking at this game and you see that both teams struggle to run the ball, knowing the matchups, so taking the defenses into consideration as well, both teams struggle to throw the ball or run the ball, and to win the game is on the shoulders of the ability in Jalen Hurts versus Danny Etling. Who do you feel more comfortable with given the schemes that they play in and the defenses they play against?
So it has to be on the arm of the quarterback to win the game passing?
No, quarterback. Just quarterback, arm and leg.
Arm and leg. I mean, if you take legs into account, I'm probably going to go with Jalen Hurts. I don't have a tremendous amount of confidence in his arm, but the ability to buy time, move in the pocket, and to scramble for a first down is pretty crucial. And probably more importantly, frankly, I think Etling is serviceable, but I am still not sold that he's a very good quarterback.
And I think it's important to look at this into the context of the defenses that they're going to be facing. And Etling isn't the kind of quarterback that gives Alabama trouble historically. He's not super efficient. He's not got a lot of vertical talent and ability that he's shown so far. So if you're looking at a Jalen Hurts against this LSU defense, I think he's going to struggle. But I think Etling's going to struggle a whole lot if he doesn't have ridiculous support in the run game, which he may not.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I mean, it isn't a great thing when you're playing a team like Alabama that can put some super athletic guys, rush the passer, and just give you fits. Just trying to defend your quarterback. If you're in a clutch situation, Entling's going to sit in the pocket. And again, we talked about this earlier, but I'm not really in awe of LSU's pass rushing. I mean, it's good, but it's not really what we've seen at times from them. And because you don't have extremely disruptive players, again, it's fourth in the conference in sacks, and that's substantial, and I understand that, but and it's only they're only ninth in the conference in tackles for loss, for example. I'm not sold that they could deal with a mobile quarterback moving the edge, whereas Danny Antling is just going to be kind of standing in the pocket. And I will say again, I don't know that the secondaries are overly dissimilar. I think LSU's is in some ways maybe more physical, but Alabama's is an there's a reason they have this non-offensive touchdown streak. I refuse to call it a not, by the way. That drives me insane that the media wants to make not into a term, but there it's a ball hawking secondary. I mean, this is a very, very good active secondary. It remains to be seen how they respond to the loss of Eddie Jackson. I mean, we probably need to touch on that because it's a big deal. But going back to your earlier point too, I know I'm rambling a bit, but LSU is 13th in the conference in pass plays of 20 yards or more. They've only thrown 14 passes that win at least 20 yards on the season. And, Alabama, we talked about the lack of deep passing game, but they've at least thrown 30. And it gets even more stark when you want to talk about, passing plays of 10 yards or more. LSU's only thrown 52. I mean, it's just not great downfield big pass plays. Most of the ones they've had some bombs, but a lot of it's just been, guys making a play in space.
And I think it's worth noting that Etling, his worst performance, his worst rating of the year was against the only good defense he played, and that was in Auburn. He really struggled in that game. 55% completion, had one 32-yarder, and the rest of the game had like 80 total yards passing on 26 attempts. So that's worth noting. I think it's also interesting, and you can tell me what you think about this. The feeling that we get is kind of the same feeling we got about Auburn post this LSU game. The feeling that we get in the Ed Orgeron era of LSU is that they are back to being a powerhouse. Even the line that the early line that came out was just a 7-point spread. So how much of this feeling, this perception of this LSU team being back, being good, being probably going to take this game to the wire is because of what they're doing on the field versus the perception that we've gotten just because there's some freshness in the program paired with the fact that they haven't played a lot of good teams?
A lot of it's momentum, or what's viewed as momentum, right? The fact that they are moving the ball and they're scoring a lot of points. People see point totals, right? And the sad truth is most people don't really watch too many ball games. The media spread out nationally. Most of them don't watch all the SEC games. And the moment LSU becomes less relevant, they stop watching the ball games, started looking at the highlights, and then, oh my gosh, LSU put up 42 points. Oh my gosh, LSU put 45. They tune into the Ole Miss game, and LSU puts up 38. And it's like, hey, they're back. LSU's LSU. This is what we want to see. It's fun. They want a team that can beat Alabama. But, one thing that concerns me a little bit is LSU went up on Ole Miss. I mean, they were moving the ball really well, but the reason they got up 38-21 in that game is Leonard Fournette had 3 huge runs early, and those runs really weren't so much even good blocking. They were a couple of good broken tackles by Fournette, but it was mostly about the fact that Ole Miss had terrible run fits. Same thing we just saw against Auburn, right? Completely out of position, and they just let Fournette run through a hole and run all the way down the field. And you can say what you want about LSU creating that through various ways, but for a lot of that game, particularly in the second half, LSU did not run the ball overly well. It honestly, to me, was more about what Ole Miss was doing wrong. And the next thing I'll note is
You're right. If you take away Leonard Fournette's 78-yarder, he only had 206 yards in the game.
Okay. We laugh at me all you want. I mean, but Leonard.
Sorry, I had to.
I mean, I sort of deserve it, right? I mean, he had 16 carries for 284 yards. We talked about how freaking crazy that is, but I think he had like 3. There was a point where he had like 200 yards on like 7 carries at one point.
Right.
And when I'm getting it,
no, I mean,
but
I was busting your chops, but Ole Miss is gone. Ole Miss, and that's what they did.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at there, and I know it's kind of stupid, and it sounds stupid, especially, but he had like 3 of his first 7 carries went for like 60 yards, and in the last 9, which was basically the whole second half, he was getting like 4 or 5 yards a carry. And there's a reason they didn't run away from Ole Miss in that ball game. They stalled. And here is the thing I'm kind of leaning up to. Ed Orgeron at LSU has played 3 games, right? Missouri, Southern Miss, and Ole Miss. All of those teams are ranked 100th or below in rush defense. All of them. So, well, I kind of hesitate to say that Ole Miss has arrived because, they're running the ball, scoring more points under Ed Orgeron. When you look at their losses, Wisconsin and Auburn, going into last week, that was the 20th and 35th ranked rush defenses in the country. Maybe the reason that they're doing so much better is that they just played by far the worst defenses that they're going to place all season. And that they played really good run defenses early in the year, and they're playing really, really bad run defenses now. So, you know, I'm really hesitant on that. And it's not even so much a knock on LSU as it is me saying, like I often do, I can't read anything from it because the teams they've played are so bad. I can't get any marker comparison. I mean, Fournette did not even play against Missouri and Southern Miss in those 42-7, 45-10 games. And I know Geis is a really good runner, and I think very underrated. But there's been a lot of teams that have run the ball in Missouri, and if you want to talk rushing defense, they got just run over right by LSU, 8 yards a carry. Well, then they played Florida. Florida averaged 7.4. Middle Tennessee State averaged 7.8. Just 0.2 yards per carry behind LSU on 40 carries. So nothing about what that LSU did against that Missouri team is in any way out of character from what everybody else has done against Missouri in the second half of the year. So yeah, I think that I really personally think LSU is really the same team they were against Auburn and Wisconsin. That's my gut feeling. Now, I will say against the Auburn game that was almost an implosion, right? That 13-point loss was pretty darn bad, but I don't really get the sense that they're really that much of a tremendously better team. I think they've just played a handful of games here where they were able to run the ball at will, and it reminds me a lot of the way where they were early last year where they didn't play any really good run defenses for most of the season. All of a sudden, they got in the latter part of the season, faced some active defenses, and the lack of balance became a huge glaring flaw. Until they played Texas A&M, who had a terrible run defense, and all of a sudden, LSU wins and Les Miles' job saved. Well, maybe you just have to take a step back, be willing to look at the opponents and the quality of the opponents, and realize that yes, your team plays better when you play teams that can't defend the run, and your team really struggles when you play teams that can. And sometimes the answer is that simple.
So before we get in the model, I'd like for you to touch on one thing that people may not be thinking about as an important aspect of this game, but I think it matters a lot, is this is the first game, in my opinion, that LSU's offense is actually going to have to be coached by someone. And it's the first game where it's really going to show or not show that you don't have your head coach anymore and you don't have your play caller anymore. So this is the first game we're really going to see that they're going to have to actually strategize against a good defense and make adjustments both in personnel and play calling from a guy who hasn't been doing it all year. Talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how well Orgeron manages the day-to-day aspects of the football team. And sorry, my voice is kind of going a little bit. I've been speaking all day, but Ed Orgeron, and the thing that defined him in his previous jobs is he was always a very good motivator. Kids love him. They've always responded well. He's had some good luck in recruiting for the same reason. Where he absolutely struggled was in program management. From 2005 to 2007, he had a 10-25 record at Ole Miss. The most he ever won in a season was 4 games. His best season was 4-8, 2-8 one year, 3-9 another. And he was fired when they lost to Mississippi State in an Egg Bowl. Mississippi State was actually a pretty good team that year. People remember that they lost, close game. Orgeron made some really boneheaded decisions, was the reason he lost. He went for it on 4th down in a situation where they really, really didn't need to and shouldn't have, trying to win the game outright, gave Mississippi State a chance to come back and win the ball game. But something they forget about is earlier that week, 20 Ole Miss players were found to have stolen items from a hotel room, including radios and pillows. And then Orgeron put the players on probation, but let them play in that Mississippi State game. for all the talk of on-field stuff, where Orgeron always struggled was managing practice, managing players and player discipline, managing coaches, managing coaching hires. You have to set training table meal schedules. You've got to set schedules for who's going to recruit when, who's going to be in the office. How do you handle academic advisors for the players? When are they going to have meeting times? When are they going to have meetings? On and on and on. It's all about the nuts and bolts. That's what makes Meyer great. That's what makes Saban great. In a lot of ways, Saban isn't really a phenomenal X's and O's coach, frankly. Urban Meyer is probably very, very good in a lot of ways. The reason both of those guys are phenomenal, though, is they're extremely detailed oriented. They have a plan for everything they do in their program, and everything underneath them. They allow the coaches really a tremendous amount of freedom, and I think that's really an underrated point. Why do I say all that? Because now Orgeron has a bye week, like you said. They've got to establish a game plan. They need to have a strategy. They don't have their NFL play caller. Instead, they're relying on a former tight end coach. And, it's going to be interesting to see how successful he can be. Because, I'll note again, in the Ole Miss era, who was his offensive coordinator in 2005 when they went 2-8? It was Noel Mazzoni, the guy that just resurrected Texas A&M. But they were 115th out of 117th in scoring in that year. Now, is that Noel Mazzoni's fault? I kind of question that. I think a lot of it is the fact that Ed Orgeron's going to do what Ed Orgeron wants to do. And when it works, because you're playing teams that can't stop the run, it's great. But there's kind of a lack of creativity and strategy and creativeness that it throughout his career has repeatedly cropped up. You can talk about the Southern Cal season where he was a great interim coach, and he had a good record that year. He went 6-2, but they only played three ranked teams. Southern Cal was pretty darn good in 2013. They played Notre Dame, Stanford, and UCLA. They went 1-2 in those three games. They beat a Stanford team they weren't expected to beat, but otherwise they lost 2 out of 3 ranked teams. All the other teams they played, the unranked ones, they all had losing conference records. So I don't personally have a ton of faith in at Orgeron in a lot of levels. He hasn't. I mean, his 3 years as a head coach were frankly a dismal failure. His time at Southern Cal looks like it was good if you just look at the record, but again, 1-2 record against ranked teams wasn't that great with a very talented squad. And behind it all was the fact that however good he is from August and September through December, I know I've talked about this before, but he's just as bad or worse. He's as bad or worse January through August. So whatever he gets you during the season of motivation, he tends to lose you when it comes to preparation. And that way, I'm interested to see how they respond to the bye week, just to see how much he really accomplished. Or, frankly, it wouldn't even shock me if they regressed from Orgeron having time to prepare the team strategically and operationally for this ball game against Alabama.
Okay, so we've spent the last half hour absolutely piling on LSU, and there's not a lot that it seems like we're in favor of them, but maybe, just maybe, the computer model shows something different. I have a feeling that it's not, but let's give the raw numbers an opportunity to maybe speak on LSU's behalf. Take it away.
Right, and this is one of the most interesting models we've run in a while, in my humble opinion. Didn't surprise either one of us. We talked about it right before the show, but it's interesting. And that's that the defenses are pretty similar in a lot of ways. Alabama is a better rush defense. They're only giving up 47% of opponent rush totals, which is just crazy. But LSU's only given up 61%. These are both
just really good.
These are both phenomenal run defenses, and both teams should struggle to run the ball at times. I mean, you absolutely should expect that from both teams, which is why, again, we were talking about the passing game and why that should be important. Against the pass, Alabama has improved in the past few weeks. They've actually passed LSU. Now, they're a better pass defense, but only just barely. Both given up 81% of opponents' totals. Alabama is just decimal points better than LSU. So you're dealing with, both excellent elite run defenses, both great pass defenses. Total yards per play, Alabama's expected to get about 3.7 yards per carry, LSU about 3.2. So that's way below LSU's average. Then Alabama have about 6.5 yards per attempt. That's not all that far off from normal for them from most major games. And then LSU getting about 6 yards per attempt. So that's about 5.1 yards per play for Alabama, 4.6 yards per play for LSU. That's a tight ball game, right? In terms of yards per play numbers. So naturally, you would think that the score would be close. Would you not?
Based on those numbers and how our models played out this year, absolutely, you'd think that.
It predicts a 24-point Alabama win. And there's going to be a lot of people scratching their heads, telling me my model's broken, etc. Again, objective model, I do all of them the exact same way. They haven't been too off base. It just told you Auburn would beat Ole Miss, 33-27. It's often pretty conservative. Um, and this is the same thing we've been saying all year. Alabama's been so good, the statistics almost don't matter. They're putting up 40 points a game, every game, no matter what. And a lot of it has been due to special teams. It's been due to defensive scores, but it's also been due to the fact that they can be very explosive at times and put up points. And they take off they don't have to play 4 quarters. So the stats end up being whatever they need to be for them to hit about 50 and quit in their best games. Conversely, LSU at times has really struggled to score. Anytime they were below 6 yards per play, their offensive output just tanked. The past 3 games we talked about earlier, and the reason we had such a long tirade on it, LSU averaged 7.7 yards per play against Missouri, 11 yards per play against Southern Miss, and 8 yards per play against Ole Miss. 42 points, 45-38. In the first 3 games where they played teams that were monumentally better against the run, 5 yards per play, 5.5 yards per play, 5.7 yards per play, they scored between 13 and 20 points. So when you have 5.7 yards per play, you should get more than 13 points in a ball game. That's about the same per play average that Alabama had against Western Kentucky, and they put up 38. So because LSU kind of plays, frankly, Neanderthal football, where they're gonna, Neanderthal it down the field, running between the tackles, trying to grind it out. That's great when it works really well and it becomes unstoppable, like we've seen with Auburn the past couple of weeks, and like we've seen with LSU. But when it isn't working great, you can't sustain drives because any sort of negative play, you can't at 5 yards per play. If I get even 6 yards per play, if I take a 3 yard loss on first down, 5.5 yards per play running the ball won't get me a first down anymore, and I've got to punt the ball. So they can consistently get 6 yards per play for 10 plays in a row, have a false start on the 20-yard line, and end up not getting any points out of it. And that's what we've seen versus Alabama, who's a lot more balanced and a lot more explosive, and they can actually turn their yardage into points on a more consistent basis.
Yeah, and I think what we've seen here is kind of you said the same. Auburn kind of relies on the same model in that it's not crazy to think that a good running team, is going to get 3.5, 3.2 yards per carry against an Alabama defense. That's actually doing pretty well, wouldn't you say, based on their history?
Yeah, no, that's that's okay.
But for Ole Miss, I did it again. For LSU, they can't operate their offense on 3.5 yards per carry. They have to have gobs and gobs of yardage on the ground, one, to protect their quarterback, and two, to just operate this offense within its limitations to score the points they need to win a ball game. So a 3.7 yard rushing average for a team that, like an Ole Miss, well, they're still in that game. But a 3.7 yard per carry, 3.5 yard per carry average for an LSU, when that's their absolute lifeblood, that could spell, and I'm not calling for it this game, but that could spell blowout given the inefficiencies elsewhere they have in their offense, which is really what you just said.
Yeah, and it really harkens back to what we saw last year with the Alabama LSU game, right? Why did Alabama just totally steamroll an LSU team that came into that game with a tremendous amount of hype and a tremendous amount of momentum? Well, that happened because LSU couldn't run the ball all that effectively. And when LSU couldn't run the ball, their play action passing game just shut down. And they rushed it for about 2.1 yards per carry. and it just, I mean, the offense just collapsed. So, 3.2 yards per carry, a little better than 2.1. I'm still hesitant on that because I don't think this Alabama rush defense is any worse than last year. In some ways, it's better. Even if they are smaller, they're more athletic. Um, like we said, it's going to come down to creativity in the passing game. Alabama's been used to running the ball well all year too, and we haven't really ragged on them enough, but they haven't faced anybody that has really had to run the ball. So, my curiosity there is, when they play somebody that has to force them to throw it, given the fact that we really haven't seen, um, anything that, yeah, again, the best rush defense Alabama's faced is Kent State at 52, Texas A&M 60, Southern Cal 69. That's still a lot better than the last 3 games LSU's played, but it's not good. And they're going to have to be able to throw the ball too. The only thing I will say there is Alabama's, because of the dual threat nature of the quarterback, I think you can generate the run a little more readily. I think Alabama's receivers are better. LSU's receivers are very good, but Alabama's receivers are elite. And that gives them some ability, even in the short passing game, to generate something. So, yeah, LSU in a traditional offense without the ability to run the ball, it's just not a real encouraging encouraging omen.
Okay, so give me we've got your model. So just for people listening, like we do every week, give me your model score again, and then give me your gut score on this game.
The model score is Alabama 38, LSU 14. I don't think it's going to be that high scoring, personally. I don't think Alabama's going to be able to put up 38 points. I think it's going to be more like 21-10. I think LSU is going to really struggle to generate anything. I think Alabama is going to really struggle for much of the game. I think it's just going to be a couple random big plays, either on offense, defense, or special teams, busted coverage or random explosive run or pass down the field that's going to get Alabama a couple touchdowns. And LSU's just going to struggle and not be able to meet that production. And I think that, yeah, my gut says a 21-10 game, even though the model says 38-14.
So to close out this show, I think, I think you're kind of in that right area for me too in terms of what I feel in gut. Again, I don't run a computer model anymore because I don't have time. But I'm going to go 24-13 Alabama. I'm not sold on LSU's offense being able to score consistently against Alabama, especially given the fact that we've seen offenses have some success and it was quarterbacks playing out of their minds that had that capability. We haven't seen that from Etling yet. I don't see him making some of the throws Knight made. I don't see him making some of the throws that Allen made, which I think is going to limit their offense and potentially lead to some turnovers, some short fields. So give me 24-13 Alabama. I think Jalen Hurts has a better passing game than he has shown, but I do think LSU's got a defense that can really limit a team, especially if they can shut down that Alabama run game. So, y'all, that's our show for this week. Another good one, another one that ran long, even though we talked about it before that we're going to make it shorter. We got a lot to talk about, so I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you made it this far. If you did, thanks so much. Thanks for coming back each and every week, giving us feedback, letting us know where we're right, where we're wrong. Please continue the discussions in the comments. And for all of y'all listening to this Alabama LSU game, give us your score predictions. Let us know what you think and let us know why. Again, that's it. Thanks so much. Y'all, God bless. Have a great week.